I check my bank balance 17 times a day now. Morning when I wake up, before breakfast, after breakfast, mid-more lunch, after lunch, mid-afternoon, before dinner, after dinner, before bed. Then 3 times during the night when I can't sleep. 17 times, every single day. Because I learned the hard way that money doesn't just disappear on its own. Someone takes it. And if you're not watching constantly, obsessively, paranoidly, they'll take everything you have and you won't even notice until it's far too late. My name's Wilbur. I'm 74 years old. Australian. Spent 46 years working for Queensland Rail. Started as a trackman when I was 21. Worked my way up to operations supervisor by the time I retired at 67. Not glamorous work, but it was steady. Paid decently. Had a good super fund. By retirement, I'd accumulated 365,000 Australian dollars. Call it about 240,000 US dollars or 190,000 pounds if you prefer those currencies. Enough to live comfortably if I was careful. Not enough to be extravagant, but enough that I shouldn't have worried about money for the rest of my life. Should being the operative word there. I was married for 31 years, Margaret. We had 3 kids together, 2 boys and a girl. Good kids. Grew up to be good adults. By the time I retired, they were all settled. Marriages of their own. Kids of their own. Lives in Brisbane and Sydney that didn't leave much room for their aging parents. Margaret died 6 months after I retired. Cancer. Ovarian. By the time they caught it, the thing had spread everywhere. She lasted 14 months from diagnosis. I watched her waste away. Watched her go from the strong woman who'd raised 3 children and managed a household to someone who weighed 42 kilos and couldn't get out of bed without help. The last 3 months were in hospice. I sat with her every day, held her hand, told her it was okay to let go. She died on a Wednesday afternoon while I was in the bathroom. Nurses said that happens sometimes. People wait until you leave the room, like they don't want you to see them go. After Margaret died, I didn't know what to do with myself. The house felt enormous and empty. Every room reminded me of her. I'd hear sounds and think she was there. I'd cook dinner for 2 out of habit, then realize I was alone. My kids came around for the first few weeks, brought casseroles, offered to help sort through Margaret's things, but they had their own lives, their own problems. After a month, the visits tapered off to weekly phone calls. After 3 months, it was fortnightly. After 6 months, I'd go weeks without hearing from any of them. I didn't blame them. They were busy. I understood that. But understanding didn't make the house feel less empty. My mate Wayne suggested I travel. Said I'd spent my whole life in Queensland. Should see other parts of the world while I still had my health. He'd been to Thailand the year before. Showed me photos on his phone, beaches, temples. Markets filled with cheap food and cheaper beer. He said a bloke could live like a king there on an Australian pension. Rent a nice place for $300 a month. Eat out every meal for less than $10 a day. Weather was warm year-round. People were friendly. Lots of expats so you wouldn't feel isolated. He made it sound like paradise. I booked a ticket in January, 2 months after Margaret's first anniversary. The house felt like a tomb, and I couldn't stand being in it anymore. 4 weeks in Thailand. Bangkok, and then maybe Phuket or Pattaya, depending on what I felt like. I didn't have a plan beyond getting on the plane and seeing what happened. The flight was 14 hours, including a stopover in Singapore. I slept through most of it. Arrived at Suvarnabhumi Airport on a Tuesday morning. The humidity hit me like a wet blanket when I walked outside. I'd expected heat, but this was something else. Thick, heavy, made it hard to breathe at first. But after 40 years of Queensland summers, I adjusted quick enough. I took a taxi to a hotel in Sukhumvit. Wayne had recommended the area. Said it was central, easy to get around. Lots of restaurants and bars. The taxi driver spoke minimal English, but he knew the address. Spent 40 minutes in traffic that made Brisbane rush hour look civilized. Motorcycles everywhere, weaving between cars. Families of 4 balanced on a single scooter. Street vendors set up on sidewalks, forcing pedestrians into the road. It was chaos, but somehow it worked. Nobody seemed angry. Nobody honked unless absolutely necessary. Just controlled chaos that flowed like a river around obstacles. The hotel was basic but clean. Small room, hard bed, air conditioning that rattled but worked. I showered and slept for 12 hours. Woke up at 9 in the evening, completely disoriented. Took me a solid minute to remember where I was. I walked down to Sukhumvit Road, found a street food stall, pointed at what other people were eating, and handed the vendor a handful of baht notes. Got back pad thai and a Chang beer. The food was incredible, better than any Thai restaurant in Brisbane. Cost me 60 baht, about $2.50 Australian. I thought there must have been a mistake, but the vendor just smiled and waved me away. I spent the first week doing tourist things. Grand Palace, Wat Pho with the giant reclining Buddha. Took a boat tour through the canals, visited Chatuchak Market, and got hopelessly lost in the maze of stalls. I ate street food every day, tried things I couldn't identify. Most of it was delicious. Some of it was too spicy for my aging stomach. I learned quickly which stalls to trust and which to avoid. I drank beer in the evenings at small bars where I was usually the only Farang. Nobody bothered me. Nobody tried to scam me. People were just friendly and curious about the old Australian bloke drinking alone. That's how I met her. Drinking alone at a bar near Phrom Phong BTS station. Small place, 6 tables. The owner was a Thai woman, probably in her 50s. She spoke decent English. We talked about Brisbane, about Margaret, about why I was in Bangkok. She was sympathetic without being pitying. Said I should try to enjoy life while I still could. Said her daughter worked at a bank nearby. Smart girl. Spoke excellent English. Maybe I should open a Thai bank account. Make it easier to access my money instead of getting ripped off by ATM fees every time I needed cash. I'd been thinking the same thing, actually. Every ATM withdrawal cost me a 200 baht fee, plus whatever my Australian bank charged. It was adding up. I said sure. The woman called her daughter. 10 minutes later, a young woman walked into the bar. Mid-20s, professional looking, white blouse and black skirt. Hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She introduced herself as Tip. Said she worked at Cassicorn Bank. She could help me open an account. It would take about 2 hours. Needed to go to the branch during business hours. Did I have my passport? I met Tip at the bank the next afternoon. She walked me through the process, explained the different account types, helped me fill out forms, translated everything the bank officer said. The whole thing took 90 minutes. I transferred 20,000 Australian dollars into the new account. About 440,000 baht at the exchange rate then. Figured that would last me 6 months easily if I was careful. Tip explained how to use the mobile banking app, how to check my balance, how to transfer money. She was patient and thorough. Wrote down instructions in English in case I forgot. When we finished, she asked if I wanted to get coffee. Said she had an hour before she needed to be back at work. We went to a Starbucks in Terminal 21. Talked for 90 minutes, even though she said she only had an hour. She told me about growing up in Bangkok, about studying finance at Thammasat University, about working at the bank. She asked about Australia, about my work, about my family. She seemed genuinely interested, not like she was making small talk out of politeness. Actually interested. Before we parted, I asked if she'd like to have dinner sometime. She hesitated. Said she'd like that, but she didn't want me to get the wrong idea. She wasn't that kind of girl. I laughed. Told her I was 74 years old and recently widowed. I was just looking for company, nothing more. She relaxed, smiled. Said dinner would be nice. We had dinner 3 nights later. A Thai restaurant in Thonglor. She picked the place, ordered for both of us. The food was excellent. We talked for 3 hours. She told me her real name was Tipawan, but everyone called her Tip. She'd never been married. Had a boyfriend once, but he'd cheated on her. She'd been single for 2 years, focused on her career, saved her money. Helped support her mother, who still ran the bar where we'd met. Her father had left when she was 8. She hadn't seen him since. I told her about Margaret, about the cancer, about how much I missed her, but also how relieved I was that she wasn't suffering anymore. Tip reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Said I seemed like a good man. Said Margaret was lucky to have had me. We started seeing each other regularly. Dinner twice a week. Coffee on Saturdays. She showed me parts of Bangkok I never would have found on my own. Local restaurants, markets, parks. We'd walk around Lumpini Park in the evenings, watch the monitor lizards in the lake, sit on benches and talk about nothing important. It felt easy, natural, like we'd known each other longer than we had. She never asked me for money, never hinted that she needed help with anything. When the bill came at restaurants, she'd reach for it, but I always paid. I insisted. She was giving me her time, showing me her city. Least I could do was buy dinner. 6 weeks into our friendship, she mentioned her mother's bar was struggling. Rent had gone up. Foot traffic had decreased. The area was changing. More expensive restaurants opening. Fewer locals coming around. Her mother was worried she might have to close. I asked how much the rent was. Tip said 18,000 baht per month, about 550 Australian dollars. I did some mental math. If I gave Tip's mother 6 months' rent, it would be 108,000 baht, about 3,300 Australian dollars, less than I'd spend on a decent holiday. And it would help someone who'd been kind to me. I offered. Tip refused, said I'd already done too much. We barely knew each other. I insisted, said I had the money. Said I'd rather spend it helping good people than pissing it away on tourist nonsense. She cried, hugged me, said I was too kind, said her mother would pay me back. I told her not to worry about it. Consider it a gift. I transferred the money to Tip's account the next day. She sent me a photo of her mother crying with happiness, said I'd saved the bar, said she didn't know how to thank me. I told her she didn't need to thank me. Just keep having dinners with me. Keep showing me Bangkok. That was thanks enough, she agreed. But then she started doing small things, bringing me coffee when we met, little gifts. A shirt, she said, reminded her of me. A book about Thailand's history she thought I'd enjoy. Nothing expensive, but thoughtful. I appreciated it. It felt like we were becoming real friends. Maybe something more than friends. I didn't want to assume anything. Didn't want to make her uncomfortable. But I was starting to feel things I hadn't felt since Margaret was healthy. 2 months into knowing Tip, she suggested I move into a condo. Said hotels were expensive over time. A decent one-bedroom condo in a nice area would be 15 to 20,000 baht per month, about 450 to 600 Australian dollars, much cheaper than staying in hotels. She knew a building near Ekamai, modern, clean, good security. She could help me look at units. I agreed. Why not? If I was going to stay in Bangkok a while longer, I might as well be comfortable. The condo she showed me was on the 18th floor, one bedroom, modern kitchen, balcony with a city view, fully furnished, 16,000 baht per month. I signed a 6-month lease on the spot, paid the first and last month plus a deposit, 58,000 baht total, about 1,700 Australian dollars. Tip helped me move my stuff from the hotel, helped me set up utilities, explained how to contact the building management if anything went wrong. She spent the whole day helping me. Didn't ask for anything in return. That evening, I cooked dinner for us in my new kitchen. Nothing fancy. Just spaghetti bolognese, Australian style. She ate 3 servings. Said it was the best meal she'd had in months. We sat on the balcony afterward, drank wine, watched the city lights. She fell asleep on my shoulder. I didn't wake her. Just sat there feeling content for the first time since Margaret died. Tip started staying over more often, just sleeping. Nothing physical at first. She'd come over after work. We'd have dinner, watch movies. She'd fall asleep on the couch. I'd drape a blanket over her. Sometimes I'd wake up and she'd move to the bed. We'd be lying there fully clothed. Nothing inappropriate, just 2 people who enjoyed each other's company. After about 3 weeks of this, she asked if it was okay if she kept some clothes at the condo. It was getting inconvenient going home to change before work. I said, of course. She brought over a suitcase the next day, hung her work clothes in the wardrobe, put her toiletries in the bathroom. It happened gradually, naturally. Before I consciously realized it, we were living together. It was around this time that Tip suggested we get a joint bank account. She explained that it would make household expenses easier. Instead of me paying for everything and her feeling guilty, we could both contribute to shared costs. She'd transfer her share of rent and utilities into the joint account. I'd put in money for groceries and other expenses. Everything fair and equal. It made sense. I'd had a joint account with Margaret for 30 years. Never caused any problems, so I agreed. We went to Cassicorn Bank. Tip handled all the paperwork since she worked there. Opened a joint savings account. We'd both have debit cards, both have access via mobile banking. She transferred 10,000 baht into the account as her first contribution. I transferred 50,000. Figured that would cover our shared expenses for a month or two. The first month was fine. I checked the account every few days. Money went out for groceries, for the electric bill, for water, for internet. Normal household expenses. Tip was good about keeping track. She'd show me receipts. Tell me what everything cost. The account balance dropped from 60,000 baht to about 42,000 by the end of the month. I transferred another 30,000 baht at the start of the next month. She transferred another 10,000. We were back up to 82,000 baht. I stopped checking as frequently, maybe once a week. Everything seemed stable. Expenses were predictable. I trusted Tip. She was handling the household finances better than I would have. I could focus on enjoying retirement, on exploring Bangkok, on being happy for the first time in 2 years. Somewhere around the third month, I noticed the account balance was lower than I expected. I'd transferred 30,000 baht at the start of the month. Should have put us at 70-something thousand. But when I checked, it was only at 48,000. I asked Tip about it. She explained that she'd paid the rent for 3 months in advance. Landlord had offered a small discount, saved us about 2,000 baht. Made sense to take it. I hadn't authorized that, but I didn't make a fuss. It was sensible thinking. Getting a discount was smart. I just wished she'd mentioned it before doing it. She apologized, said she should have asked. It wouldn't happen again. I said it was fine. No big deal. Just communicate next time. The account balance kept dropping faster than I expected, though. By the fourth month, I'd put in 150,000 baht total. Should have had at least 60 or 70,000 baht left. The account showed 24,000. I did the math. We'd spent 126,000 baht in 4 months. That was over 9,000 Australian dollars. For rent, utilities, and groceries. That seemed high. I asked Tip to see receipts. She got defensive. Said she'd been managing the money responsibly. Said if I didn't trust her, maybe we shouldn't have a joint account. I backed down. Apologized. Said I was just trying to understand where the money was going. She softened. Said Bangkok was expensive. Things cost more than I realized. Vegetables at the market, meat, cleaning supplies. It added up. I accepted that explanation. I'd never lived in Bangkok before. What did I know about actual costs? I started checking the account more frequently again, every couple of days instead of weekly. And I noticed something strange. The money seemed to disappear in chunks, not gradual spending on groceries and utilities. Big withdrawals. 5,000 baht one day, 8,000 the next, 4,000, 6,000. I asked Tip what these were for. She always had an explanation. Her mother's bar needed repairs. Her cousin needed medical treatment. She'd bought new clothes for work. Every withdrawal had a story, and the stories were always reasonable. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Because if I didn't trust her, then what was I doing here? I'd given up my life in Australia for this, for her. If I couldn't trust her, then I'd made a massive mistake, and I wasn't ready to face that possibility. I transferred another 50,000 baht into the account at the start of month 5. Within 2 weeks, it was down to 18,000. I checked the transaction history carefully, looked at dates and amounts. And that's when I saw the pattern. Every time I deposited money into the account, Tip withdrew money within 24 hours. Sometimes within hours, I'd deposit 50,000 baht. 6 hours later, there'd be a withdrawal of 25,000. I'd deposit 30,000. The next morning, there'd be a withdrawal of 15,000. It was like clockwork, like she was monitoring the account constantly, waiting for deposits so she could extract funds immediately. I felt sick, actually physically ill. My stomach churned. My hands started shaking. I sat on the condo balcony, staring at my phone screen, looking at the transaction history, scrolling through months of deposits and withdrawals. The pattern was undeniable once I saw it. I'd been so focused on monitoring how much I was putting in that I hadn't paid attention to what was coming out. I'd been watching the wrong thing, making sure I deposited enough to cover our expenses, not noticing that the expenses were far higher than they should have been, not noticing that every deposit triggered an immediate withdrawal. I did a full audit that evening, went through 5 months of transactions, added up everything I'd put in, everything that had gone out. The numbers were staggering. I'd deposited 230,000 baht into the joint account, about 6,800 Australian dollars. Tip had deposited 50,000 baht total, about 1,500 Australian dollars. We should have had at least 100,000 baht remaining if our household expenses were what she'd claimed. The account had 9,000 baht in it. 271,000 baht had been withdrawn over 5 months. That was almost 8,000 Australian dollars. For what? Rent was 16,000 baht per month. Should have been 80,000 total for 5 months. We'd paid 96,000 because of the 3-month advance payment. Utilities were maybe 3,000 baht per month. 15,000 total for 5 months. Groceries should have been 10,000 baht per month maximum. 50,000 for 5 months. Even being generous, I could account for maybe 161,000 baht in legitimate expenses. That left 110,000 baht unaccounted for. 3,200 Australian dollars. Gone. Vanished into thin air, or more accurately, into Tip's pocket. I didn't confront her immediately. I needed to think, needed to figure out what this meant. Was she stealing from me? Or was there some explanation I wasn't seeing? Maybe Thai household expenses really were that high. Maybe I was miscalculating. Maybe there were costs I wasn't aware of. I spent 3 days feeling paranoid, watching Tip, looking for signs. She seemed normal, affectionate, caring, made me breakfast, asked about my day, laughed at my jokes. She didn't act like someone who was systematically draining my bank account, which made me doubt myself, made me wonder if I was being unfair. Being suspicious because of some inherent prejudice about Thai women and Western men. I'd heard the stories, read the forums, old Farangs getting scammed by bar girls and gold diggers. But Tip wasn't like that. She had a real job, a degree. She'd never worked in a bar or anything like that. She came from a good family, or at least that's what I'd believed. On the 4th day, I checked the account again. I hadn't deposited anything in a week. The balance was down to 3,000 baht, which meant 6,000 baht had been withdrawn over the past few days. Normal household expenses don't work like that. You don't spend 6,000 baht in 3 days on electricity and vegetables. I looked at the transaction history. The withdrawals were marked as ATM cash withdrawals, all from different machines. One near Tip's Bank, one near a shopping mall in Siam Square, one in a neighborhood I'd never heard of. She was taking cash out, not paying bills, not buying groceries with a debit card where there'd be a paper trail. Cash withdrawals, untraceable, could be used for anything. That evening, I asked Tip directly, showed her my phone with the transaction history, asked her to explain where the money had gone. She looked at the screen, looked at me, and for just a second, her expression changed. The warmth disappeared. Something cold flashed across her face. Then she composed herself, smiled, said she'd been helping her family. I asked what kind of help. She said her mother's bar had more problems. The air conditioning broke. Cost 40,000 baht to replace. I asked why she hadn't mentioned it. She said she didn't want to burden me. She knew I was on a fixed income. She'd been trying to handle things herself. I asked about the other withdrawals. She had explanations for each one. Her cousin's medical bills, a loan to her brother who needed to pay off a motorcycle, money for her aunt's funeral. Each story was plausible individually, but together they didn't add up. Her family seemed to have a new crisis every single week. I told her I wanted receipts, proof of where the money went. She got angry, said I was calling her a liar, said she'd been nothing but good to me, taken care of me, made me happy. And this was how I repaid her? With accusations? I tried to stay calm, said I wasn't accusing her of anything. I just wanted to understand, wanted to see documentation. She refused. Said if I didn't trust her, we should end things. Packed a bag, left the condo, slammed the door on her way out. I sat there in silence, feeling like the world's biggest asshole. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she really had helped her family and I was being paranoid and controlling. Maybe this was just cultural differences. Thai families help each other more than Western families do. Maybe I needed to be more understanding. She came back 3 days later, apologized, said she'd overreacted, said she understood why I was concerned, showed me some receipts, a receipt for air conditioning repair, 42,000 baht, looked legitimate, had the bar's name on it, a hospital receipt for her cousin, 18,000 baht, medical treatment for dengue fever, a receipt from a motorcycle shop, 25,000 baht, her brother's loan payoff. All the receipts were in Thai. I couldn't read them. Had no way to verify if they were real, but they looked official enough. Had stamps and signatures and account numbers. I felt guilty for doubting her. Apologized. Said I should have trusted her. She hugged me. Said it was okay. Said she understood. Said we'd be more transparent going forward. No more surprises. Things were okay for about 2 weeks. Then I noticed the pattern starting again. I deposited 20,000 baht. Within a day, there was a withdrawal for 9,000 baht. I deposited 30,000. 2 days later, there was a withdrawal for 14,000. I asked Tip about them. She said her mother needed help again. The bar had slow business. Needed money to restock inventory. I said I'd just given her mother 6 months' rent not that long ago. Surely the bar should be stable. Tip got quiet. Said business was harder than expected. Competition from bigger restaurants. The rent money had helped, but it wasn't enough. The bar might still close, unless I could help a bit more. Just until things stabilized, I said no. Said I'd already given too much. Said her mother needed to figure out the business problem or close the bar. Keeping it on life support with my money wasn't sustainable. Tip didn't argue, just nodded. Said she understood. But I could tell she was disappointed. Could tell she'd expected me to open my wallet again. I stopped depositing money into the joint account. Started paying for everything with my personal account. Kept the joint account at near zero balance. If Tip wanted to drain it, there'd be nothing to drain. She noticed immediately. Asked why I wasn't putting money in anymore. I said I was being more careful with my budget. She asked how we'd pay shared expenses. I said I'd pay them directly. She didn't need to worry about it. She asked if I didn't trust her. I said it wasn't about trust. It was about me being more responsible with my finances. She let it drop, but I could feel the temperature change in our relationship. She was around less. Started sleeping at her mother's place more often. Said the bar needed her help in the evenings. Some nights she wouldn't come home at all. I checked the joint account obsessively, multiple times per day. Watching for withdrawals, there were still some, small amounts. 2,000 baht here, 3,000 there. The account balance hovered between 5 and 8,000 baht. I wasn't adding money, but Tip still had her debit card. She could withdraw whatever was left whenever she wanted. I thought about closing the account, but that would be an admission that I didn't trust her. Would be the end of the relationship. I wasn't ready for that. I was still hoping there was some explanation, some way this could all make sense. Then one morning I checked the account and it was at zero, completely empty. 8,000 baht had been withdrawn the night before. Single ATM transaction. While I was asleep, I checked my personal account. That was fine. Tip didn't have access to that. But the joint account was cleaned out. Everything gone. I felt a weird sense of relief mixed with devastation. Relief because now I knew for certain. No more doubting myself. No more wondering if I was being paranoid. She'd taken everything that was left. That was clear theft. Undeniable. But devastation because it meant everything I'd feared was true. The woman I'd been living with for 7 months, the woman I'd started to love, had been systematically stealing from me the entire time. I confronted Tip that evening when she came home. Asked why she'd emptied the account. She didn't deny it, just shrugged. Said she needed the money, said her family needed help, and I wasn't giving it anymore, so she had to take care of things herself. I asked how much she'd taken total. She said she didn't know, didn't keep track. Maybe 100,000 baht. I pulled out my phone, showed her my calculations. 271,000 baht. Almost 8,000 Australian dollars. She looked surprised, said it couldn't be that much. I showed her the transaction history. Scrolled through months of withdrawals. She went quiet. Then she said I'd given that money willingly. It was in a joint account. She had every right to use it. I said joint account meant for joint expenses, not for her to drain every time I deposited money. She said I didn't understand Thai culture. Said families help each other. Said I was being cheap. Being a typical Farang who thought Thai women were only after money. I said the evidence suggested that was exactly what she was doing. She left again. This time she took all her clothes, all her things, said she was done, said she'd tried to make me happy, but I was too paranoid, too controlling, too suspicious. She couldn't live like that. Couldn't be with someone who counted every baht, who treated her like a criminal. I watched her pack, didn't try to stop her. Part of me was devastated, part of me was relieved. When she left, I sat in the empty condo and cried for the first time since Margaret's funeral. Not because I loved Tip exactly, but because I'd been stupid enough to trust someone I barely knew with my money and my heart. I did a complete financial audit over the next week. Went through every transaction in both my joint and personal accounts. The numbers were worse than I thought. The joint account had cost me 271,000 baht, about 8,000 Australian dollars. But there were other expenses. The 6 months' rent I'd given Tip's mother, 108,000 baht, about 3,200 Australian dollars. Random cash I'd given Tip for various things. Another 80,000 baht, about 2,400 Australian dollars. The condo deposit and advance rent, 58,000 baht, about 1,700 Australian dollars. Various gifts and dinners, probably another 60,000 baht, about 1,800 Australian dollars. When I added it all up, I'd spent 577,000 baht in 7 months. That was 17,000 Australian dollars. Out of the 365,000 I'd started with, I had 348,000 left. I'd lost 17,000 Australian dollars. Not enough to ruin me, but enough to hurt. Enough to make me question every financial decision I'd make for the rest of my life. I tried to report it to the police. Went to a station near my condo. Explained the situation to an officer who spoke broken English. He listened politely, took notes, then explained that this was a civil matter, not criminal. The money was in a joint account. Tip had legal access. I'd given her the rent money voluntarily. The gifts were gifts. There was no crime. I asked about the systematic withdrawals, the pattern of taking money every time I deposited. He shrugged, said that was poor financial planning on my part. Should have kept better track. Should have closed the account if I didn't trust her. He was right. That's what made it worse. I had no legal recourse, no way to get the money back. I'd been stupid and careless, and now I had to live with the consequences. I stayed in Bangkok for another 2 months, partly because I'd paid for the condo through the end of the lease, partly because I didn't want to go home and admit what had happened. My kids knew I was in Thailand, but they didn't know about Tip. Didn't know I'd been living with someone. If I came home early, they'd ask questions, want explanations. I wasn't ready to provide them. So I stayed, lived alone in the condo. Went out occasionally, but mostly kept to myself. I developed this obsessive need to check my bank balance. Started checking it constantly, morning, noon, night, multiple times each. Making sure the numbers hadn't changed, making sure money hadn't disappeared mysteriously. It became compulsive, pathological. I knew the balance wasn't changing. I was the only one with access to my personal account, but I couldn't stop checking, couldn't stop verifying that my money was still there. The paranoia extended beyond banking. I started suspecting everyone. The woman at the 7-Eleven who was friendly. Was she being nice because she liked me or because she thought she could get money from me? The taxi driver who chatted during the ride. Was he just friendly or was he setting me up for some scam? The restaurant server who laughed at my terrible tie. Was she being polite or was she mocking the stupid farang who'd been taken for a ride? I couldn't trust anyone, couldn't take any interaction at face value. Everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted something. I'd proven that I was an easy mark. A naive old man with money who was desperate enough for companionship that he'd ignore obvious warning signs. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that Tip had moved on quickly, had a new boyfriend within 3 weeks of leaving me, another foreigner, British, older than me even, 70s. Retired banker with a nice pension. The acquaintance showed me photos from Facebook. Tip and the new guy at a restaurant, at a beach resort, looking happy, looking in love. I wondered if he knew what he was getting into. Wondered if he'd noticed the pattern yet. Probably not. Probably still in the honeymoon phase where everything seemed perfect and she seemed devoted. Give it a few months. He'd open a joint account. She'd start helping her family. Money would disappear. He'd make the same mistakes I made. Or maybe he'd be smarter. Maybe he'd see the signs I missed. I hoped so. But I doubted it. I left Thailand at the end of my lease. Flew back to Brisbane. Moved back into my house. The one that had felt like a tomb after Margaret died. It felt exactly the same. Empty. Silent. Full of ghosts. But now it also felt safe. Controlled. Nobody here was going to steal from me. Nobody was going to drain my accounts. I was alone, but at least I was alone with my money intact. Or mostly intact. Down 17,000 but not destroyed. I could survive this. Would survive this. But I'd be different. Would be suspicious. Would be paranoid. Would check my bank balance 17 times a day for the rest of my life. Because I'd learned that money doesn't disappear on its own. Someone takes it. And if you're not watching constantly, they'll take everything you have. My kids eventually asked what happened in Thailand. Why I came back early. I told them I'd gotten tired of traveling. Missed Brisbane. Missed my own bed. They accepted that explanation. Didn't push for details. I haven't told anyone the real story. Too embarrassing. Too humiliating. Admitting I'd been scammed by a woman young enough to be my granddaughter. That I'd watched it happen in slow motion. Saw the pattern. Had the evidence right there in the transaction history. And I'd ignored it because I wanted to believe I'd found something real. Something that made sense of Margaret's death and my retirement and the empty years stretching ahead. I wanted to believe I could be happy again, that someone could care about me for reasons other than my money. I was wrong. The thing is, I'm still not entirely sure Tip set out to scam me from the beginning. Maybe at first it was genuine. Maybe she did like me. Maybe the first time she asked for money it really was for her mother's rent. But then she saw how easy it was, saw how readily I gave, saw how much I wanted to help, wanted to be needed, wanted to be the hero. And she took advantage of that, not with a grand plan, just opportunity by opportunity. A little here, a little there, each time justified by some crisis. Each time I gave willingly, until it became a pattern. Until she was monitoring my deposits and timing her withdrawals to maximize extraction while minimizing my suspicion. By the end, it was purely transactional. She wasn't even pretending anymore, just taking what she could get until I cut off access. Then moving on to the next mark. The next lonely old man with money and a desperate need for companionship. I'm 74 now. Same as when I started this story, because this all happened in the last 18 months. I still live in Brisbane, still in my house, still alone, still checking my bank balance 17 times a day. The compulsion hasn't faded. If anything, it's gotten worse. I wake up at 3 in the morning and grab my phone, check the balance, make sure nothing's changed, verify that all $348,000 are still there. It's irrational. I know it's irrational, but I can't stop. The trauma of watching my money disappear in real time, of seeing withdrawals pop up hours after I made deposits, of realizing someone I trusted was systematically draining my account while smiling to my face. That's not something you just get over. I've tried to date since coming back. Met a woman through a friend. Nice lady. Widow like me. We had coffee twice. She mentioned her car needed repairs. Something about the transmission. Probably cost a couple thousand. I ended things immediately. Couldn't risk it. Couldn't risk getting involved with someone who might need money. Might have problems I'd feel obligated to solve. Better to be alone than to be used. Better to be lonely than to be poor and lonely. That's the calculation I've made. That's where Tip left me. My advice to anyone reading this and thinking about getting involved with someone in Thailand or anywhere else overseas when there's a significant age difference and wealth disparity is simple. Don't open joint accounts, ever, for any reason. Keep your finances completely separate. If you want to help with household expenses, give cash for specific things. Groceries, utilities, rent. Get receipts. Keep records. Don't make it easy for someone to drain your account while you're not looking. Don't assume that because someone has a degree and a job, they're not capable of financial manipulation. Education and employment don't make someone honest. They just make them better at hiding dishonesty. Second thing, watch for patterns. If you notice money disappearing every time you deposit money, that's not a coincidence. That's deliberate. That's someone monitoring your account and timing their withdrawals for maximum extraction. The first time it happens, maybe it's chance. The second time, it's suspicious. The third time, it's proof. Don't ignore it. Don't rationalize it. Don't let loneliness or desperation override common sense. I saw the pattern, had the evidence. Chose to ignore it because admitting what was happening meant admitting I'd made a mistake, meant being alone again. I wasn't ready for that, so I let it continue. Let her take 8,000 Australian dollars before I finally acted. By then, the damage was done, both financially and psychologically. Third thing, if someone's family has constant emergencies they need money for, that's a red flag. Real families have occasional problems, but not weekly crises. Not monthly catastrophes that all require immediate cash. That's a story, a script, a way to extract money from foreigners who feel guilty saying no. Thai culture does emphasize family support. That part is true. But there's a difference between helping family occasionally and funding an endless series of manufactured crises. Learn to distinguish between the two. Fourth thing, understand that you're vulnerable, especially if you're older, especially if you're recently divorced or widowed, especially if you have money and you're lonely. You're a target. Not because Thai women are inherently dishonest, but because there are dishonest people everywhere who specialize in identifying and exploiting vulnerable people. Being aware of your vulnerability is the first step in protecting yourself. Being honest about why you're really in Thailand or the Philippines or Colombia or wherever. Are you there for the culture? For the weather? Or are you there because women who wouldn't give you the time of day back home suddenly find you attractive? Be honest with yourself about the answer. Because if it's the latter, you need to be extra careful. You need to assume every interaction is transactional until proven otherwise. I wasn't honest with myself. Told myself Tip liked me for who I was, for my personality and my kindness and my life experience. Maybe she did, but she also liked my bank account. And when push came to shove, the bank account mattered more than anything else. I'm not saying don't retire to Thailand. I'm not saying don't date Thai women. I'm saying be smart about it. Be cautious. Be aware of the risks. Don't give people access to your money. Don't make it easy for them to take advantage of you. And if you see warning signs, don't ignore them. Don't rationalize them. Don't tell yourself you're being paranoid or prejudiced. Trust your instincts. They're usually right. Mine were right. I just chose to ignore them. Chose to believe the fantasy instead of accepting the reality. Cost me 17,000 Australian dollars. Cost me my ability to trust people. Cost me my peace of mind. I check my bank balance 17 times a day. That's what Tip left me with. That's the permanent damage, not the money. The paranoia. The compulsive need to verify that what's mine is still mine. The knowledge that I can't trust my own judgment. That's what getting scammed does to you. That's what I'm trying to save you from. I don't know if I'll ever stop checking my balance obsessively. Don't know if I'll ever be able to trust someone enough to have a real relationship. Don't know if the paranoia will ever fade or if this is just who I am now. A suspicious old man who counts every dollar and watches every transaction and assumes everyone has an angle. It's not a good way to live, but it's the life I have. The life I bought with my $17,000 and my naive belief that someone could care about me for reasons other than money. I hope you make better choices than I did. I hope you're smarter than I was. I hope you check your bank balance before it's too late, because once the money's gone, it's gone. And once the trust is broken, you can't get it back no matter how many times you check your balance.